Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we are going to be looking at Parshat Shemini this morning. We are in the book of Leviticus. Shemini is a loaded parsha. There's three major themes to pick from whenever we study Shemini. Shemini has the laws of kashrut in it. Shemini begins with the dedication ceremony of the Mishkan, dedicating the Mishkan. And part of that theme and that story, of course, is the tragic deaths of Nadav and Avihu. And it's really easy to steer away from that text But funny enough, where I got hooked this week was in the Nadav and Avihu text. And you know that what's exciting me these days at my age is this long into studying and teaching Torah. What's exciting me now is like these interpretations that I'm just able to dig deeper because, I've taught at the other levels. So now I'm able to dig really deep and I'm finding interpretations that I cannot believe I've never heard before. And it's just great. It's very exciting. So this one's for me. You all may go, really? That's where she went this morning. But this one's for me. I am very excited. It's going to be a bit of a grammar lesson this morning, but I want to bring it also as a way for you. Don't worry about following the whole grammatical conversation. Don't worry about it. What I want you to hear and just let it wash over you are the arguments scholars have in trying to translate biblical Hebrew, because you have to do it in the context often of Akkadian, Sumerian, Ugaritic, and now there's another one, Eblaic. Who knew? In the 70s, they found tablets from Ebla, and so Eblaic is an East Semitic language. Akkadian is a West Semitic language. So now we have East Semitic and West Semitic parent languages of Hebrew to look at when you're trying to figure out which root of a verb is the one we're dealing with to translate this word, because the whole scene, the meaning of the scene depends on how you translate this one word. That's what we're going to look at this morning. So again, Pam's excited. So yes, square. So welcome to the nerd club. So you don't have to follow, again, what I'm saying about the grammar. I'm going to expose you a little bit to the arguments the scholars make so that you can understand that whenever you read a translation, there are parts of it that are like right now still being contested. I read an 18-page article on one word of Torah and the new arguments around how to translate it based on Eblaic and some other research. Okay, so, and then we're going to talk about what it means if we translate it differently than I have always learned it. Okay, here we go. So let's jump into the text. So first of all, we need context. We need to remember that we've gotten a lot of instructions about building the Mishkan. We have the golden calf incident. Then we have Moshe coming down with the second set of tablets. Then we get the description of everything again as it's being built. The anxiety, if you'll remember our study from last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember anymore. The anxiety after the incident with the calf is, will God's presence fill the Mishkan? Will it work? Remember? So God promises, that this is going to happen, that's going to happen, but the people don't know if they've been truly forgiven. They'll only know that if a fire comes from the divine and consumes the offerings on the altar. Okay? So there's a lot of anxiety building up in this scene to, will it work? Will the divine presence fill the Mishkan? If not, the whole thing is for naught and the people are toast, walking around the ancient Near East without God's presence. So this is a big moment. Shemini means the eighth. That's our name of our parsha, Shemini, the eighth, meaning the eighth day. There was a whole week of consecrating the priests. Everything had to be consecrated, including the priests. And on the eighth day is the big reveal and it's opening night. Will God show up? The whole thing is for the divine. If God doesn't show up, the whole thing is pointless and useless, and it will prove to the people that God has abandoned them. All right. So a lot is riding on this 8th day, the ceremonies happening to lead up to the moment where God will consume the sacrifice and prove God's presence is in the Mishkan and prove that God's presence is among the people, that they have been forgiven and are deemed worthy for God to be with them. That's the scene we're coming into as we begin Parshat Shemini. So we're not going to start at the first chapter of Shemini. We're gonna go to the end of the first chapter. This is the end of the first chapter of Parshat Shemini, chapter 9. All the drama of the ordination has happened. 7 days they've been dealing with consecrating everything and everyone. And now is the big test. Now's the big moment. Vayisa Aaron et yadav el ha'am vayivarchem. Aaron lifts his hands towards the people and blesses them. He steps down after offering the purgation offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of God appeared to all the people. All right, so this is the big, yes, exactly, Tamara. This is the big moment. The presence of God appears to all the people, and what happens? Vatetze eish melifnei Adonai, and a fire comes forth from before God's presence. V'tochal al mizbeach et ha'olah, and consumes the Holocaust and the fat parts that are on the altar. Vayar kol ha'am, and all of the people saw, and they shouted, meaning in a joyful way. Vayiplu al pneihem, and they fell on their faces. All right, this is the big moment. God appears. God's fire goes forth and consumes everything on the altar. Where's the altar? The altar is outside, right? The tent. Okay. Moshe and Aharon, where were they? They went inside the tent. They come out, and the presence of God appears. Then a fire comes forth from before God and consumes everything on that altar outside the tent. How we studied this before is that what we learned in that year that we studied this, a couple of years ago or last year, was that if God's presence is in the Holy of Holies, God's presence is in the tent of meeting. If that fire goes out from before God's presence, it travels from the Holy of Holies, from the ark, to the altar outside the tent of meeting. What is in between the Holy of Holies and the Mizbeach outside? The incense altar is in between. Oh, Tamara's starting. The lights, come on. Now, at the same time, meanwhile, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took their fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before God Esh Zara, strange fire, which had not been commanded them. We always understand this as something sequential after what we just read above. But we've learned, read it as happening at the same time, that Moshe and Aaron are in there and blessing and whatever. Nadav and Avihu bring an incense offering that they were not told to bring. They're in the wrong place, at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. And as this fire comes out from before God, it consumes them, and they died before God. Right? If we place this at the same time, this is the same Aish that comes out from the tent of meeting to consume the sacrifices on the altar. What's in the way of that fire, what's on the path of that fire, is the incense altar. Nadav and Avihu are not supposed to be there. They were not commanded to bring this offering, meaning they shouldn't be in the way. But they're in the way. Like that plane, on the runway, or that, vehicle that was on the runway that the plane ran into. It's like there was a miscommunication. If you don't communicate, and you're in the way of the nuclear, explosion coming out of the tent of meeting, they were consumed by the fire. All right. But we're not going to spend a lot of time there or on that sequence. We're going to go somewhere else. We're going to go to this sentence. This is where we're going to hang out. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon. And Moshe says to Aaron, his two sons are now, their corpses are smoking, right, in the tent of meeting. And Moshe says, this is what God meant when God said, through those near to me, I will be made holy. And before all of the people, ekabed, I will be glorified. I will have glory. Vayidom Aharon. And the way we translate this usually is, and Aharon was silent. So first of all, we have Moshe immediately trying to say to Aaron, there's a reason for this. And it's what God meant when God said, through those near to me, I'll be made holy. I'll be made, glorified in front of all the people. Moshe's giving a theological defense, what we call, this is like defending God, to Aaron, who is standing not far from the corpses of his sons. Okay. So there's that dynamic. Then Vayidom Aharon. Aharon was silent. Moshe calls then to Mishael and Elzaphon, sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. Who does Moshe not call? He does not call Aaron's sons or Aaron. He calls their cousins to come take their bodies out. They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics, as Moses had ordered, meaning they're not touching the corpse. And Moshe said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Itamar. So Eleazar and Itamar are not called to take their brothers' bodies out. What he says to Aaron and his two surviving sons is, do not bare your heads, which is a sign of mourning. Do not rend your clothes, another sign of mourning, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kin, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that God has burned. And do not go outside the tent of meeting, lest you die. For God's anointing oil is upon you. And they did as Moses had bidden. Then God speaks to Aaron and gives him a law about not drinking intoxicants when they are doing sacred service. And now we get Moshe instructing Aaron and his two surviving sons about other offerings that they are to offer and what the procedure is supposed to be. Okay. So a couple of things. If we read this, which I choose to, and I totally get that it's a choice, but I choose to read this as they are in the way because they weren't supposed to be there. They are consumed by this fire. So this horrible tragedy happens on the day of the fulfillment of all of this work and all of this, focus on the Mishkan and its function among the people. It works, it functions. And part of that winds up being this tragedy of Nadav and Avihu. What we get is immediately Moshe, like we said, defending God. This is his response. And what's Aharon's response? Vayidom Aharon. And Aharon was silent. Now, reams of commentary have been written on those two words. Vayidom Aharon. Aharon was silent. Normally, it's because it is translated this way, Vayidom. He was silent from one understanding of the possible Hebrew root that is being used here. But it's not as clear as it seems. And it turns out, after reading 18 pages of an article on this word, what I learned was that it's translated silent here because it's translated that way other places. And in those other places as well, we could challenge the translation. So this is agreed upon as a translation as silent because other places it's translated as silent. But if you take all of those places and look at them lined up, you could argue for a different translation in those places too. Not all of them. Some places it clearly means silent. But there's other places it doesn't come from dom, silent. It might come from damam, So we have three possibilities. Let's look at Klein. We have three possibilities. Dom, which is silent. Damam, or dom can be still. So dalid vav mem, or damam, dalid mem mem. And one interpretation of damam is to become silent. And you see places in Ugaritic, damam, to keep silent. Damdam in Aramaic. Arabic, damdama. Ethiopian, tadamama. Okay. Related to the bases, dalid vav mem and dalid mem he. What are some of the derivatives of those two? Damama, damum, domem, dumam. All right. So this is explicating all of the possibilities that come from the dalid vav mem root and the dalid mem he root. And we get damam. Okay. And when you get these repeated consonants, the mem here is repeated, damam, one drops. When you conjugate the verb, one of those mems drops. And you get dama or dom. Okay. You don't have to know, you don't have to remember, this doesn't have to make any sense to you. I just want you to hear, trust me. Just trust me when I say this. So you start to understand the complexity then of translation. Well, there is other translations we know related to dam, which of course is blood. Damam, to bleed. So if you're bleeding, right, then demem. So this is a whole nother stem for dalid mem, which is not about silence. It's about dam, blood. Okay. But there's another one, it turns out. And our scholars are going to pull up another example of damam. Here's damam 1. They're going to give us, in their study of this word, another interpretation of damam in an article called Silence, Sound, in the Phenomenology of Mourning in Biblical Israel. Is there a more exciting title? Look at Bert's laughing. Like, all right, I know you can't wait to jump in. All right. So, I'm not going to do all 18 pages, trust me. All right. Look at this paragraph starting with both. Both the comparative and the inner biblical evidence to be adduced presently will suggest an alternative rendering. And what is that alternative rendering? And Aaron mourned. This rendering identifies in Leviticus 10:3b, which is what we're looking at, the second half of 10:3, a homonymous Hebrew root, here to be classified as damam 2, to moan or to mourn. Understood in this way, Leviticus 10:3b means that Aaron reacted in the customary manner. He moaned or wailed and was about to initiate formal mourning and lamentation for his two sons. Once this line of interpretation is considered, the commentator will read the remainder of Leviticus 10 differently. Immediately after the bodies of the two dead sons of Aaron had been taken outside the encampment for burial, verses 4 and 5, Moses issued instructions to Aaron and his two remaining sons not to engage in formal mourning by baring their heads and rending their garments, lest they meet death and arouse God's wrath against the Israelite community. Rather, the entire house of Israel was to act in their stead and mourn. And the Hebrew for mourn here is about the verb to weep, the untimely death of the two priests. Mourning, even over a son or brother, would have defiled Aaron and his two remaining priestly sons at a time when their purification was just taking hold. Read in this way, Leviticus 10 actually achieves a higher degree of symmetry. A higher degree of symmetry. What does that mean? Let's go back to 10:3. Moshe says to Aaron, this is what God meant, and he gives him some kind of word salad here that we know nothing about. We've never heard this before. We never heard God say this. Okay, but whatever it means, that's not where we're spending our time this morning. Whatever Moshe means by this, what is Aaron's response? Vayidom Aharon. What if it's translated like our people looking at the Ugaritic, the Ablaic, and the Akkadian? What if it means Aaron started to wail and to moan in absolute agony. What they mean by symmetry is then it seems to make more sense if we translate it that way. A, that's what Aaron responds, like that seems like the more normal response of a parent. B, it's what he responds when Moshe tries to justify this somehow. And it explains Moshe saying, do not bare your heads or rend your clothes. If Aaron's standing there silently, it makes less sense. But if you translate this as Aaron starts to moan an uncontrollable wail in response to his son's death, then it makes sense that Moshe is like, wait. Don't go any further with the technicalities of mourning because the anointing oil is still on you. You can't do that. If you do that, everything will explode. You have to let the people do all of those things for you. The cousins can deal with the bodies. Y'all can't. You're still in the middle of ordination stuff. You're still in the middle of the ordination ceremony. You will cause things to blow up worse. That makes much more sense if Aaron is wailing, right? Yeah, I get it, Aaron. You're upset. I get it. I understand. And you cannot bare your head and rend your clothes. Don't start the formal rituals of mourning or you will make it all worse. Let the people do that for you. I like that interpretation way better because so much of the commentary I've studied over my whole lifetime dealing with this verse talks about the responsibility of leadership and that Aaron knew he had to suck it up and serve rather than be a father and mourn. There are other people who want to translate this, as we looked at Klein, from still, to be still. There's one interpretation through Torah that runs that this stem can mean to be still, to remain, to stay. People who translate it from that stem want to say he was shocked into stillness. Like there were just no words. There was nothing. He was completely dumbstruck. That makes sense as well. It doesn't make as much sense to me, though, as translating it as mourning and making a moaning, wailing sound that comes from mourning. Okay? But you can ask, like, well, why should we accept that translation more than any of these others? Well, if you're going to go there, then you have to look at the evidence. So don't worry, I'm bringing you the evidence. There it is. So here's to be still. Do you see the third line? Damam, one, to be still. He's quoting other scholars who noted that the Akkadian cognate, damamu, to mourn or to moan, and after Ugaritic evidence became known, together with another scholar, they pointed out a Ugaritic verb, damam, clearly cognate with the Akkadian damamu, and used in parallelism, meaning in Ugaritic and Akkadian literature, parallel to the word bakai, to weep, which we see in our text as well. That let the people mourn, weep for you. In Akkadian and Ugaritic, in their poetry, in their sacred liturgy, it uses damam as a parallel to weep, bakai, just like in our text. As will be shown here, the recent Ebla discoveries have yielded further cognates of proposed Hebrew damam to, meaning to mourn or to moan. And so then they go through some more evidence to go to this sentence right after the little three. Haupt, or however you say that, also referred in a study to Leviticus 10:3b, but he suggested vocalizing consonantal vayidom. What Aharon did is vayadum, from the root dalid vav mem, meaning Aharon was stunned or petrified, right? Which is what we just talked about a little bit. All right. Or like to endure, he's just shocked into not being able to respond. Go past the little 4 here. It was Haupt's view that in biblical Hebrew, the germinant root damam never means to be silent, and that this meaning is always conveyed in Hebrew by forms of the middle weak root dalid vav mem. Vav is weak. So always when there's silence involved, This scholar is suggesting it's always Daled Vav Mem. It is never Daled Mem Mem. In Hebrew, Israelite Hebrew, Daled Mem Mem means only what Akkadian and Ugaritic do, meaning to moan or to mutter. That is all it can ever mean. It can never mean to be silent. So all these people who have accepted the translation here as being Daled Vav Mem have completely thrown out the Ugaritic and the Akkadian and now the Hebraic proof that there's a parallelism with damam and weeping, and that damam means, sounds related to mourning or grief. Okay. So that seems like pretty good evidence to me. But then if you go further into Hebraic, a third language. So we looked at Ugaritic, we looked at Akkadian. Now we're looking at a third Semitic language. Those two were West Semitic. This is East Semitic. Akkadian damamu, to mourn. Nominal dimatu, moaning. These attest clear connotations in context, meaning where we find those words in Akkadian. In the lexical series, as in literary sources, verbal damamu is synonymous with baku, to weep. And we read of humans and animals, as well as objects, such as swamp reeds, emitting sounds akin to mourning. Okay? So we have that all over Akkadian. But look at this. Recently, evidence from Hebraic texts has added to our knowledge of the cognate Semitic root, which would be expressed by biblical Hebrew damam tu, the one we've been talking about, moaning. I have referred elsewhere to Hebraic texts, originally edited by G. Petzinato, wherein ideographic shidu is a term meaning lament in a bilingual lexicon, also edited by Petzinato. Ideographic shidu is rendered by the Hebraic noun dimumu, lament, just in case it wasn't clear. To be more specific, right? So they found a bilingual dictionary at Ebla. Thank God. They found words translated from other Semitic languages into Hebraic. So the direct correlates are there on remnants of tablets. And they find this damam to mean to mourn or to lament. An actual derivative of damam, to mourn or lament, occurs in a collection of administrative texts from Ebla, recently re-edited by another scholar. The Hebraic lexicon, right? So the Hebraic dictionary they found, thus yields two cognate terms meaning to lament, dimumu and damatu, thereby indicating a provenience for this lexeme in the West Semitic languages prior to the Old Babylonian period in which Akkadian damamu is first attested. Look at Tamara with her hand over her mouth, right? That's what happens to some of us when we read this stuff. Because what is this saying? The Hebraic dictionary is older than Akkadian. This appearance of damam too, this damam meaning mourning or weeping, is in Ugaritic, and it is which is West Semitic, and it's also in Hebraic, which is East Semitic, predating Akkadian. It is that old. So you see here the poetry that is being quoted to give us damam too, this second meaning of damam. So I wish I had my cursor. I don't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down on the left. 7 lines down on the left. Do you see that word TBKN? Tivkain. That's about weeping. Bacha, boche. That's about weeping in Ugaritic. Look at the next word. Vatidum. What did we have with Aaron? Vayidum. It's the same word, people. It's the same verb, but for a female. So it takes vatidum. With Aaron, it's vayidum, right? That makes sense. He, this one is she. Let her weep and what? Vatidomli, and mourn and moan and lament for me. Vatidom, the verb to lament or to mourn. Not only does parallelism here reinforce the conclusion that here we have damam too, and not dom, meaning not silence, but poetic context considerably clarifies Ugaritic usage of the verb damam For we read in words reminiscent of biblical verse of eye wells gone dry from excessive weeping. Now, you did not have to follow any of that to hear that there's an argument here, a real argument among scholars who know these languages and can translate the shards of poetry found at Ebla. They are arguing that this is not to be translated and Aharon was silent. Thank God. I will never translate it that way again, ever. It felt weird. It felt bizarre. It felt that is not our tradition. And that's the other thing they look at. In ancient Israel, did people mourn by being silent? Do we get other attestations in our sacred, texts or in any of our literature or in any of the literature of the ancient Near East about being so overcome with grief that you're still and silent? Guess what? No. But we get lots of parallels between weeping and damaming in the Semitic languages before Hebrew, before Akkadian. So that parallelism right there. But the other thing we get is lots of mentioning of wailing and rending the clothes. Women are hired to wail for important people. They ululate, right? The la 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 la, right? That noise people are paid to do for important people. The more people ululating, the more respect the person who died has and is being shown by the community. There is no evidence to suggest Vayidom here means dom silent, but damam, noise related to the agony of grief. Boom. Okay, Lisa.
I was just thinking, that it is consistent with also the people being called upon to mourn. So he would be mourning with them, because at least from a modern perspective, for Aaron to be silent, it's almost a rejection of God, saying what you did to my sons makes me reject you, which would be really revolutionary.
All right, so wait a minute. So
that's how it reads to a modern ear.
Okay, link silence with rejecting God. I want to hear more about that. What does that mean?
Well, you just annihilated my sons, and you're about to be proven the God of this people. This is the moment where you present yourself, and the first thing you do is you murder my sons. I don't subscribe to this God.
So
I don't know what Aaron would actually do, because in those days an individual would not do that. I mean, you're part of a group, but it would seem to me a really radical thing in a way for him to be silent. I mean, it would be a form of resistance.
Interesting, because normally it's translated as an expression of his piety and humility, that he accepts God's decree of death for his sons and does not protest. I'm not arguing your translation. Right to me. No, I know, right? So because I agree with you, I don't think it makes sense here. I think the tradition has had to twist itself to interpret Aaron's silence as piety. I think you're right. Silence could be actually interpreted as, I'm not speaking to you anymore. I'm done with you, right? It doesn't make any more sense than piety. You could right? So, okay. Bert?
First of all, you're absolutely right, as usual. I have no idea what you were talking about. So, however, pulling back, looking at the big picture, I do think the point you were trying to make, which I think is a really good one, is that we can't really go to an English translation and grab a word and start interpreting the word, and this and that and this and that, and be sure. I mean, for many people, the King James version of the Old Testament or the Torah, whatever you want to call it, or our translation, that's what it is. That's what it means. For those of us who speak more than one language, we realize that the difference between languages is not just that we use different words for things, but the concepts are different and connections are different in different languages. So it makes it difficult. First of all, it makes it difficult to talk about Torah in English, and I think we all have that problem. But second of all, even for people who understand Hebrew, we're talking about, like pre-Chaucerian English. We're talking about something that's very, very, very old. So then the question comes, which I really don't have an answer to, is, therefore, what do we make of this? And one thing is, well, we can't know anything about it. We can't interpret it because we really don't know what it means. I'm not just talking about this word. You can go through the entire Torah and come up with, and therefore forget it. Or you can say, really, what this is about is the Jewish people trying to grapple with our ancient stories, and in the grappling is the meaning, not in the translation and in the words.
Beautiful. Beautifully said, Bert. I couldn't have said it better. We will never, hopefully, in this group, as people studying Torah, the answer is never, we can't really know the definitive answer, therefore why bother? That is never going to be the answer, God forbid. Chas v'shalom. Chas v'chalila. Chalila, chalila. The answer is always what you so beautifully articulated, which is how wonderful that scholars who have published Levine, this article that you can read yourself, this article was by Baruch Levine, who did the JPS Torah commentary on Leviticus. In his translation for JPS, he translates Vayidom Aharon as Aharon was silent. Baruch Levine is saying we should never tire of being open to the wonder that we might have a different actual translation. In other words, he wrote this article out of love, right? He went back to the scholarship and he reconsidered his own opinion in light of the Ebla material and in light of some of these other scholars who brought forward the Akkadian and Ugaritic parallelisms. And so for me, I learned as much from that as I did from the New Translation. I learned as much from watching a biblical scholar with the status of Baruch Levine go, how exciting. And that's why he published this article. He wanted to publish it to say to people, don't assume you're done learning. Don't assume because you're an expert even in the field of philology of Eastern and Western Semitic ancient Near Eastern languages, don't assume you're done discovering. That was so inspirational to me. It's why I brought it to you, because how exciting. And now I won't ever be able to translate it. I'm not going to ignore the traditional translation of he was silent, but now, right, I have access to a whole nother understanding of what the story may be about. And it isn't that he doesn't have a public role. He does. But it makes much more sense that that's in tension with the agony of his grief. And Moshe saying, I've been watching this show, Love Story. It's so unlike me. But I've been watching this show, Love Story, which is the Kennedy, JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette story. And they keep referencing JFK standing by his father's casket, right? And that the little boy who salutes, the 3-year-old who salutes his father's casket as it goes by with his mother, Jackie, dignified, stoic, beautiful, elegant, composed. That's what we're talking about in this scene, I think, is that if we translate it this way, which I like so much better, he's wailing and moaning, and Moshe says, we have to go face the public. And you have to keep it together, and you have to salute your son's caskets, because the people are watching. And you represent for them right now something bigger than your own private grief. I know it's horrible. Suck it up, because otherwise it's going to be so much worse. Had Jackie lost it in front of everybody, right? And fallen into the grave sobbing. Like, imagine what that would have done to the people. She knew that. She understood that. And she translated that to her son, JFK Jr. And he took his cues from her. I don't know what I'm trying to say other than that is so much more powerful for me, that he wails and moans and can't, right? It just comes out of him. And Moshe says, and you have the anointing oil on you, and we now need to go face the public. All right, Lori?
But what's interesting to me then is regardless of the translation, you end up in the same place. You end up in the place of, as a leader, you have to put your own personal pain aside in order to be there for the people. So whether it's Aaron being silent because he knew that already, or Moshe telling him that, you still end up like, so all the scholarship of all these years that you're talking about, of that he's silent because he knows that as a leader of the people, he needs to hold it together. That scholarship still holds.
Yes.
You just get there in a different way.
Yes. So, but it's not just get there in a different way. I think translating it this way highlights for leaders the agony that is there that you have to suppress in order to serve. Vayidom Aharon is he accepts it. He knows his place. He knows his role. He's consigned to it, or not consigned, resigned to it. This for me gives a sense of the tension of his like groaning and like uncontrollable moaning, and also having to keep it together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Unless you want to like go beyond the text and interpret and project onto Aharon, he was silent because we're going to now assume what was going on in his head. He was in agony. He wanted to grieve, but he knew he couldn't.
Right. Yep. Betsy?
It just seems to me that regardless of the interpretation, like whether you look at the word as blood, dam for blood, or damama or whatever, I mean, I don't understand how, with whatever interpretation you give to that word, there's still the assumption that after all is said and done, Aaron is taking on leadership, continuing to take on a leadership role, and continuing to have faith in this God after God basically murdered two of his children. To me, that doesn't compute, because if he's a normal human being, then why would he continue to believe in this God after God just took away probably what he loves most, presumably loved most in the world?
All right. So none of us can answer a why question. None of us can answer that. Why would he continue to believe? That's a question we can't answer. You can artistically put all that you want to in there about your own ability to believe in stuff, even after you've lost and grieved and whatever. So that we can't answer why ever. But you're not paying enough attention, in my mind, to my original statement, which is this was an accident. His sons were in the way. God didn't murder them. They were in the way. So what do you say to a parent in the ER whose kid was driving too fast in the rain and killed themselves and their sibling in a car crash? What do you say to that parent? God murdered your kids? No, you would say this is a horrible, horrible accident. And the universe is constructed in such a way that terrible, awful accidents happen. Whether it's accidents in our bodies with cells, or whether it's, accidents out on the road, whether it's accidentally bombing a girls' school and killing 120 girls, there are horrible things that happen. It's not to be laid at God's feet.
Well, I completely agree with everything you just said, and that's totally understandable. I guess what is hard for me to understand is this whole sacrificial system, and like what the point is if it's that dangerous that you could be consumed just because you're trying to make some kind of an offering to God. And because I understand they got in the way, but
the point of the whole system is to draw God's presence close, to have God's presence among the people so that they are protected. Yes, that is hugely dangerous. Why do we use nuclear energy when it's so dangerous? If there's a meltdown, we know what happens. Why do we bother with nuclear energy? So, because if you do it right, it gives you things that only nuclear fusion can give you. If you do the sacrificial system and the rites and rituals correctly, which is how you're supposed to do it, people don't get eaten up by fire. Mm-hmm. But if you screw with nuclear stuff and you're not following the instruction manual, or you're in Artemis 2 and you don't follow the instruction manual for the heat shield coming back in, what's going to happen? So this is what we're dealing with, their understanding of that. And the priests and the Levites take the risk for the Israelites. They take the risk on behalf of the Israelites. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones in the way. They're the ones who, if they screw up, they get burned up on reentry. That's why they have status. It's why they don't have property. It's why they're given of the sacrifices to eat. But it's how, in a way, they're not only more important or more holy than the Israelites. They are sacrificing their own safety for the regular Israelite firstborn who was supposed to serve. All right, Robert?
Well, I feel a lot better now than I did before about this passage, because we've struggled to understand lots of things, but this is one of the more difficult ones that we've struggled for years. And what I remember that really bothered me and now doesn't is that one of the interpretations we have given is that Aaron was silent because he felt responsible. He had not properly trained his children. And boy, that's no longer something that I can say to myself makes sense. It was a struggle to believe it, but I sort of did. I think we sort of did. And the other thing we've said is that it's sort of the kids' fault because they did something they were not supposed to do. And that didn't bother me quite as bad as the father feeling that he had caused the death of his children. But, in our search for meaning in everything we're reading and discussing, we went down those paths. I went down those paths.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, how do I feel better.
I'm so glad Torah said he could make us feel better. Really difficult text.
Well, so if we stumble across some more that seem really, really difficult, I hope you'll dig back into Haitian and Ugaritic and whatever and solve some, make us feel better about it. But this was a big one.
And so what do we do with it? Like, either way, we come back to Moshe jumps into an explanation defending God. Aaron and his sons have to serve, right? So that part does not change. And so I was first introduced to this new translation by Shai Held from Hadar. Then I had to go, of course, find the article that he quotes to make this interpretation. But he has a bigger point. And that point is that Moshe was wrong, that Moshe should not have said anything to Aaron about, behold, I will be this is what God meant when I'm sanctified by the ones close to me, blah, 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 blah. And he suggests that Moses is actually the one who's super anxious. That just like at Sinai, when God's presence was there, the people immediately screwed up and undermined it and almost caused everything to be obliterated. Remember, God's like, get out of my way. Let me destroy them. Shai Held says the same thing happens here. Moses has God's presence there. Something undermines how that's supposed to go. And Moshe freaks out and is afraid this is going to derail everything. And that it's Moshe who, right, is frightened. Look at this last sentence on page 8. Moses is frightened and uncertain about Israel's future. The very heart of its life, the reason for its being, its covenant with God, may be in grave danger. So Moses expects the priests to put that reality first. As Bible scholar Roy Gain puts it, Moses' intense reaction reflects the severity of the situation. The lessons here are subtle, he says. The impulse to explain other people's tragedies often stems from our own fear of chaos. It is almost always crucial to resist the urge to share those explanations with them. But sometimes people find themselves in positions of great responsibility. Part of what those roles entails is that we cannot always give free and unhindered public expression of our grief. So Shai Held is saying we tend to be like Moses. A lot of people tend to react like Moses, which is needing to come up with an explanation, right? Or how it's going to be okay. Like, or why this happened. All things happen for a reason. God doesn't give you anything you can't bear, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, people rush to these responses, just like Moshe did, out of their own fear of how random and chaotic the world can actually be. And we as chaplains when we're dealing with people in pain and in grief, and you as therapists are trained the same way, we are trained to resist that temptation at all costs. We are never to explain why or to defend, right, that it's okay. We are there to sit with people as a non-anxious presence with their pain. And Moshe doesn't. And Held, along with other scholars, are saying that was an inappropriate response to Aaron's anguish, particularly if we explain this verb as he was moaning and wailing in his grief. It's even more stark what Moshe's response is, right? And even more kind of misguided than if he's silent. And that in any case, there's often times where we have to suck it up. I think about us as parents. I think of us as dog owners. There are times when we have to manage our panic so that the kids don't freak out, so that the dog doesn't freak out, right? The dog doesn't react if we stay calm. If we stay alpha, then they can relax. If we freak out, they feel like they have to take care of everything. And so they start barking to defend us because we are weak and somebody's got to defend the pack. So for me, there's just a much more tangled relationship of grief and response and agony and responsibility and chaos and fear going on here than we usually read. And for me, it just helps me appreciate the complexity of what's being described as our relationship to any sacred system, any system that needs to function and work regardless of what goes on, and our own need to respond to our own pain. That those things are often in our everyday lives held in deep tension. How do we celebrate when we're in pain? How do we show up for other people when we're dealing with our own loss? That is what our community has been holding for a year and 3 months. How do we show up for each other? It's what we're holding as we look at Israel, and we're in agony about what's happening in Israel. For some of us who also seriously disagree with starting a war right now with Iran with no plan. But we're in agony for the people in Israel. It's like, so it, right? It's this tension between wanting the system to work and knowing that it didn't, and it resulted in this, but not wanting the result to be what it deserves to be, which is chaos and devastation, so that people can learn their lesson from it. Because we don't want that for civilians. We don't want that for Israel or for Iranian civilians. It's this tension that we've been holding and that we continue to hold that I think this part of the Parsha articulates in ways that I'm only now appreciating and relating to differently. And it points to me to the dignity of doing that as a community and as a world community right now, particularly because the pain is so bad and the loss and the fear is so bad. And the incredible responsibility of not thinking we know and showing up to texts like this, open and ready to discover something new. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.